Seder, where every day's Casual Friday. That means Monday is Casual Monday, Tuesday, Casual Tuesday, Wednesday, Casual Hump Day, Thursday, Casual Thurs, that's what we call it, and Friday, Casual Shabbat. The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
It is Friday, September 27th, 2024. My name is Emma Vigeland, in for Sam Seder, and this is the 5-time award-winning Majority Report. We are broadcasting live steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On the program today, Joshua Cohen, aka Ettingermentum, will be with us to talk about Kamala Harris's polling momentum and which polls you should look out for as junk polls and which ones are good. Also on the program today, New York City Mayor Eric Adams' arraignment for federal charges of bribery, fraud, and taking illegal foreign donations is set for today at noon. Kathy Hochul is examining a dormant rule that lets governors remove officials like mayors, including issuing a statement urging Adams to, quote, find an appropriate path forward. She's trying to do the Nancy Pelosi in this situation, although she just doesn't have the juice, honestly. We'll see. I think Adams will have to step aside. This is ridiculous, but Harris is up narrowly in most swing states in the latest Morning Consult poll. And a Fox News poll has Harris ahead in Georgia. I will say, though, other polls are not as rosy as what Fox portrays. New economic numbers show faster GDP growth than expected in the post-pandemic years. A win for Democrats. Zelensky meets with Trump after meeting with Biden and Harris yesterday. And UN member states lead a mass walkout of diplomats during Netanyahu's address to Congress this morning. To the United Nations this morning. The death toll in Israel's attack on Lebanon reaches 700. Jim Clyburn says Harris should keep Lena Khan. Really big for him to lend his name to that. Trying to lock Harris in if she even wanted to get rid of Lena Khan. The donors do, though. The DNC will send money to every state Democratic Party in the country for the first time ever, even in states with deep red majorities. That's really good stuff. A New York appeals court hears arguments about whether or not the nearly $500 million civil fraud judgment for Trump was too big. Smartmatic has settled its defamation lawsuit against Newsmax for all those election lies. The figure is undisclosed as of now. House Dems look to file a censure motion against Clay Higgins for his racist tweet about Haitian migrants. And lastly, in Kansas City, at least 2 building unions have voted to authorize rent strikes next month. Want to see more of that? All this and more on today's Majority Report. Welcome to the show, everybody. It's a casual Friday. Sam is out today. He's at a conference. But who's not at a conference are my friends Matt, my friend Bradley. Hello.
Good afternoon.
Oh, thank you. It is technically
Good
afternoon. Very formal over there. You are wearing a collared shirt today.
My lady, all my t-shirts were in the wash.
Okay, that's
it was not a purposeful.
Not purposeful spiffing up there, but let's get right into it. I'm really excited for our conversation with Josh because he has some great articles out on his Substack about polling, about how to read polling, that you're not going to hear in most of the press because all you're hearing is this is a very tight race. But what are the dynamics that make it tight? Is it as tight as they're describing? We'll be talking about all of that with Josh. But first, so Elon Musk, the free speech hero, here to save us all, many people are calling him the Iron Man, right, of the Avengers. Or that's what he thinks of himself as, fighting against, like...
I think that's what Matt Taibbi called him. I mean, a rough translation of what Matt Taibbi called him on Joe Rogan. Said the guy just loves free speech and he's in it for the love of the game.
And, you know, I mean, he's putting on his cape and he's trying... Does Iron Man wear a cape? He's putting on his cape and he's trying to tamp down on and fight against, like, the most important issues of our time. Like, is being trans contagious? Or... you know, can the brain microchips I'm putting in monkeys that are killing them, but I want to put in humans, can they double as skull shape measuring devices? These are the kinds of ideas that Elon Musk wants to promulgate on the platform that he acquired, Twitter. So yesterday, with that said, a friend of mine, friend of the show, Ken Klippenstein, who didn't respond to my text today, by the way, wanted to see if he'd come on the show, but I guess we are not as good friends. Ken had time for breaking points this morning. Ken.
We don't have to discuss it.
I will be discussing it later. He ended up getting banned from Twitter, actually, yesterday, at least suspended indefinitely, because he reported on the 271-page dossier of J.D. Vance, and he published that dossier on SubStack. This dossier was essentially research by the Trump campaign into Vance's past, what his potential liabilities would be, and mainstream media outlets have refused to publish it because it is hacked material. The Trump campaign is alleging that Iran hacked it. We don't know if that's true. This is in part because Trump illegally assassinated the Iranian general Qasem Soleimani, creating immense tensions for no reason, so he could feel like a tough guy. But here's Ken this morning on Breaking Points describing his reasoning behind publishing this dossier, and then we'll get into how when he published it and tried to post it on Twitter, Elon Musk, the free speech warrior,
election interference.
Yeah,
some people are calling the thing that happened last time. So
first, just take me through your thinking, why you came down on in a different place on publishing this dossier than other news outlets did.
Yeah, a number of other news outlets acquired this, including the New York Times, Politico, the Washington Post. And I just thought it was the worst of media paternalism to decide that the public, that they knew better and the public doesn't need to know these things. And to the extent that they did talk about it, I mean, they were happy to paraphrase some of the contents. So I thought, well, why not just show people the underlying thing instead of relying on their paraphrase? And an initial concern I had, having worked in media for a number of years now and seeing how when media tries to make the judgment about what people are going to be interested in and misreads what the general public might be interested in because they're, you know, overwhelmingly focused on other things, I think that turned out to be true in this case. I encourage people to go and read the actual document and compare it with the articles that were said to have paraphrased it, in which the media was saying, look, we've already basically talked about what's interesting there. What's the deal here? Look at the actual document, compare that with reporting, and you're going to notice a gulf between those two things, a huge difference in terms of the specific parts of the document that were never mentioned in any stories, and just the tone of the campaign. To me, the most interesting thing is not the disclosures, looking at this as something like the Steele dossier that's going to have all this salacious detail.
Right.
That was never what this was.
Right.
What's interesting about this is the metatextual point of that it gives you insight into what the campaign thinks is problematic about Vance. And what's interesting about it is overwhelmingly the theme that they focus on as being his liability is what makes him Trumpy. It's like the MAGA dimension to his character that they seem uneasy with, which is funny and interesting because it shows that the party is in conflict with Trump. They both need him to win, and they're uneasy with his policies, particularly the ones that tend towards isolationism and protectionism.
Yeah, there were definitely some things in here that made.
Yeah, I think Crystal goes on to make a point there that what was interesting is that the cat lady's part was not included in this Oppo research document that the Trump campaign put together. And as Ken says, this is newsworthy. They saw the protectionism, the isolationism as a potential liability, and then a major section of this 271-page document is about Vance's past criticism of Donald Trump, which of course they saw as a liability because this is a campaign run to appease the narcissist at the very top. And so that is all newsworthy. Like, the isolationism and the Trump criticism is seen as a liability for the campaign, but not his past comments that were extremely sexist that have become a flashpoint in the Democrats' criticisms of him. So Ken's exactly right that it's insufficient for these outlets to say, oh, we're just going to summarize it and give you our assessment of it. It's an arrogant view of their own importance and their own editorial discretion. And what's interesting about all this, now, you can go to Ken's Substack, kenklippenstein.com. He reports really well on national security issues as well, so you can read that dossier there. But in terms of the free speech hypocrisy of this, I mean, it is just insane, right? Because Ken then publishes this. He puts the link out. He's suspended indefinitely, probably banned. We'll see what happens, but a lot of outlets are expressing outrage over this, mainstream ones, from Twitter for publishing this document. A link to his Substack where you could download the document, not just like a full upload of the document itself. Elon Musk was claiming that this was because he posted private information about JD Vance, who is trying to be vice president of the United States. And I went through this document. Ken redacted Vance's social security number. He redacted his address. He redacted his email address and his phone number. Anything that would be personal to JD Vance was redacted in this document. So this claim is outrageously ridiculous and wrong, and that brings us to the Twitter files. But Matt,
isn't it also the truth that Klippenstein linked to the original unredacted documents just because that's a principle? Like, people should be able to check that as anybody would. Like that was my understanding of that. Issue.
That is correct. I think that's probably what they are alluding to, but people have been able to find that link is accessible to folks.
No, exactly. And I agree with Clen's reasoning, which is that like it should not just be reporters willing to pay for these sort of boutique services that have everyone's information. If this stuff is available, it should be available to the public.
And again, this isn't some person living in Michigan living their life. This is the guy that is running to be the vice president to the oldest presidential candidate in the general election in history now that Biden has stepped aside. So it's quite important to have this information available. Now, him getting banned, folks may not remember, Elon Musk, Matt Taibbi, Barry Weiss, who apparently just got a multi-million-dollar evaluation for her stupid media company, they were up in arms last year about the supposed suppression of free speech on Twitter that was damaging to Biden. Now, to recap, in 2020, Twitter as a company, before it was acquired by Musk, internally debated this decision to restrict the sharing of a New York Post story about Hunter Biden that included Hunter's leaked nudes, leaked sensitive images of him doing drugs, all of that. The Biden campaign did contact Twitter about it, which is the kind of thing that a campaign would do. And the conversations that Taibbi released in these Twitter files revealed not that the Biden campaign was excessively putting its thumb on the scale of the situation, but that they had contacted Twitter, yes. But then there was extensive internal debate about whether or not this Post article violated Twitter's policy against the dissemination of hacked materials. Then they ended up limiting the reach of a particular New York Post article that included the nudes, the sensitive images, etc. They didn't suspend the journalist from Twitter. They restricted the link. So if Ken's link had been restricted to some degree, okay, I don't really see the value in that.
I don't agree with it, just like I didn't agree with the original thing with the Hunter Biden stuff, which is frankly the only thing they can hang their hat on that was substance, had substance about that.
But this is not what happened here. And let's just go back in time, because this was last year. Matt Taibbi, the publisher of the Twitter files, during this testimony in front of Congress, Representative Elise Stefanik, Republican, asks Michael Schellenberger and then Matt Taibbi if they believe that limiting this reach of this one New York Post article constituted election interference.
And Mr. Taibbi and Mr. Schellenberg, do you believe that this censorship is a form of election interference?
Absolutely it is. There's no question in my mind.
Mr. Taibbi?
Yes, I think it certainly can be. In the latest story that we did on the CTI League, we saw the overt partisanship of the people involved in this operation. That was actually the reason the whistleblower came forward. The people involved just assumed, one of the quote was, they assumed everyone who was smart thought the way they did. They talked about the potential election of Donald Trump being an end of the world event. They talk about the wackadoodles who actually watch Fox News. And even as somebody who doesn't vote for Republicans, it was shocking to me to see this. And I think this was a consistent theme of not just the CTI League, but most of the censorship organizations that we looked at. They all tend to drift in one direction.
Yeah, the private organizations he's referring to, by the way, that he conflated in his piece with government organizations because he misread them, but we'll put that aside for a second. So the political biases of these Twitter employees at the time being San Francisco liberals, their suppression of this New York Post article constituted election interference, according to Matt Taibbi. Election interference. Now, would you say that JD Vance or that Elon Musk committing to donate over $40 million to Trump's campaign, the owner of this free speech platform, then suppressing an article and banning the journalist who was critical of that presidential candidate's VP pick that revealed sensitive information of that, would that constitute election interference? Go ahead, Matt. Sorry.
The reason these guys, Taibbi and Greenwald particularly, like to lean on this as election interference isn't because they genuinely believe it's election interference. It's because they need to have some subscription to some election interference theory against Donald Trump. And they know that they can't subscribe to they're busing people across state lines to vote, they're importing illegal immigrants, because they know that's bad. So they can do a media critique version of it, which is, again, that all these organizations, which I disagreed with at the time, and again, if they just let that link fly that night, we could all have just ingested the Hunter Biden story and found out that actually there's nothing there, because when we point to it now, it's just that initial suppression and nothing in the content of it. But and Hunter Biden isn't the VP; he's the son of the pre. I mean, to me, that's different. A family member of the person who's going to be a politician and their salacious activity, that matters much less than the vice presidential candidate, in my view. I think that's true.
We don't even need to make that distinction. But here's Elon Musk, 2023, the guy who bought Twitter in part because he said he wanted to beat back this suppression. And you heard Matt Taibbi right there say that because some Twitter employees had Democratic political leanings, that their internal deliberations about this Post article constituted election interference. Well, here's the guy who's a mega donor to the Trump campaign making that same case about that internal deliberation back in 2023.
Of this. I mean, you do some tweets that seem to be, or at least give support to some who would call others conspiracy theories.
Well, yes, but I mean, honestly, some of these conspiracy theories have turned out to be true.
Which ones?
Well, like the Hunter Biden laptop.
That's true.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
what about it?
Eating the
that
dogs.
was a pretty big deal. There was Twitter and others engaged in active suppression of information that was relevant to the public. That's a terrible thing that happened. That's election interference.
But how do you make a choice?
Oh, election interference. Okay.
What information was that, by the way? Can we be specific about that? They had crack pipes and had weird text messages?
Yeah. The information was that Hunter Biden has some difficulties in his personal life.
And I'm voting for Trump now.
Yeah.
Therefore.
Can you pull up this Washington Post article from the time, Bradley? Just to hammer this point home one more time before we leave you on this. I mean, these people are just so despicable and cynical and lying. I mean, it's not just about the Twitter banning. It's about the rank hypocrisy around this free speech garbage. So this is back in 2023. Elon Musk's Twitter files ignited divisions but haven't changed minds. If you could just scroll down to this part here about Ro Khanna. So the Twitter thread, this is what Matt Taibbi posted, based on internal communications posted by Substack writer Matt Taibbi, showed the company independently decided to limit the spread of the article without Democratic politicians, the Biden campaign, or FBI exerting control over the social media network. In fact, the only input from a sitting politician that Taibbi noted was from Silicon Valley Representative Ro Khanna, Democrat, who told Twitter executives they should distribute the story regardless of the potential consequences for his party. I'm not persuaded these are anything close to a bombshell, said Jamil Jaffer, the director of the Knight First Amendment Institute at Columbia University.
He's great, Jamil Jaffer.
In an interview. In the process, Musk took the extraordinary step of promoting the leak of internal company communications to Taibbi, exposing the names of several rank and file workers and Khanna's personal email address. Now, apparently at issue was the fact that, as Matt pointed out, Ken published a redacted version, but also for posterity said, you can find these documents at this link to know that I'm not editing anything. They said that that was enough to suppress his piece and to indefinitely ban him from the site.
Which, again, he didn't even link them to that on Twitter. He just posted his piece to Twitter.
Exactly. And Musk leaked Ro Khanna's personal email address in this process last year, in 2023. So there's nothing there. There's no principle there except right-wing politics. This dude used this lie about free speech and highfalutin principles to purchase the major journalistic social media communications platform and turn it into a right-wing cesspool for his own aims. This whole free speech movement, know what it really is. Know what it really is. And then here's Matt Taibbi tripling down, even though Daddy Musk has already turned on him. High Progressive Great account on Twitter said Ken Klippenstein published the Iranian hacked materials on JD Vance and was subsequently banned. A pretty much exact mirror of what Matt Taibbi, Elon Musk et al. Were hand-wringing about with regards to the suppression of Hunter Biden's laptop story during the 2020 election. And Taibbi says, no, it's not the same unless the FBI had a hand in getting him suspended. Well, as I just read from the Washington Post, there is no evidence that Democratic politicians, the Biden campaign, or FBI exerted control over the social media network in any regard.
The funny thing about that is, like, okay, first, it's the classic, like, libertarian. Like, I don't care if a capitalist suppresses your speech. Yep. It's if the government does. But even that point aside, the whole point of making an issue about that in a few years ago should be that it doesn't create a precedent that chills speech subsequently, which clearly it has, because it took to Ken Klippenstein to publish this stuff. And the lineage of this stuff, Ken is, I'm proud that he's on our side and doing this stuff. Betty Metzger is the woman who published the documents that were released in 1971 about the FBI. And they were sent to a number of journalists, and those journalists thought, well, I don't know what the provenance of these docs are. I'm afraid to publish them. Thankfully, Betty stepped up and did it. But, like, there's so much like faux mythology about how great our press is that these guys, Taibbi and I think Greenwald, play into, that we're the adversarial, fierce journalists. And I think that Ken is playing that role here more
absolutely
accurately.
No. The guy who's not cozying up to the billionaire and begging for his attention, please, 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 unshadow ban me. Can we be friends again? Yeah.
And for the record, neither of these is election interference, but both of them should be published. That's my take on it.
Exactly. All right, folks, we're going to get to Josh Ettingermentum in just a second, but first, a word from one of our favorite sponsors, Sunset Lake, Seder.com. Use the code LEFTISBEST for 20% off their best products. They have all the good stuff there. They have the gummies, which Seder and what do you call melatonin in it, and I use that basically every night. They have the keef, they have the smalls that you can put in with your other stuff. They've got tinctures, they have fudge, they use regenerative farming practices. They treat their employees well. They have good values as a company. We've done multiple joint kind of matching fundraisers with them for strike fund, for funds, for refugee resettlement organizations, and all of that good stuff. You can feel good about supporting Sunset Lake Seder and by using the code LEFTISBEST for 20% off. There you go. And also know that if you want to relax, you want a little treat after dinner. Oh, there goes my camera.
It's a melatonin camera.
You're right. This is what your vision's going to be like once you have a little bit of Sunset Lake Seder to take you and drift you off to sleep. It really is great. You can get a lot of crappy products on the side of the road that just like, I mean, specifically in New York, it's like, what even is in this? Well, you know what's in this with Sunset Lake. So use the code LEFTISBEST to get 20% off. It is sunsetlakesebede.com. All right, quick break, and when we come back, we'll be joined by Ettingermentum. are back, and we are joined now by Joshua A. Cohen, aka Ettingermentum of the Ettingermentum Substack, also writes over at The Nation. Josh, thanks so much for coming on the show today. Oh no!
Yeah, we'll take a break here.
We're gonna take a break because Josh said to us this may happen. He's in an area that's a little stormy right now, so we'll be right back. He may call over the phones. 1 sec. We are back, and we are joined by Joshua A. Cohen, aka Ettingermentum, over at the Ettingermentum Substack. He also writes over at The Nation. Josh is in the middle of a stormy part of the country right now. I know a lot of folks are as well, so his power just went out. Thanks for joining us by phone, Josh.
Yeah, it momentarily went out. When it goes out for like a second, then it comes back on, which is generally kind of fine, but inconvenient when you're trying to do like live streaming like this.
Yeah, it's not convenient, but I wanted to have you on regardless because you had two great pieces on your Substack. But let's start with the latest one. This election isn't a toss-up. For people that don't know, Josh is both has good politics and also is really good at reading the polls. And you were accurate about there not being a red wave in 2022. Josh, am I on speaker? Yeah. Here, just take me off speaker, okay?
Yeah, sure.
Yep. All right, that's better. You were right about there not being a red wave in 2022. You were right about Biden dropping out and what that would mean for the polling. And so your assessment of the race is rosier, I think, than what we're hearing in a lot of news coverage of this, which is that it's a toss-up, that this is a razor-thin margin. But let's, I guess, start with where your map as it stands and how you feel about particularly the floor of Harris with these three Midwestern states.
Yeah, so those states have been it's an interesting kind of ironic situation, or only kind of ironic if you if you follow this stuff really closely, because I think 8 years ago the kind of consensus for the future of politics would be is that you would have Republicans who would dominate in the Midwest, and you would have Democrats who would do really well in the Sun Belt, and that was the future of the country. That's the way things were headed, and there's that did happen to some extent. We have kind of seen some Sun Belt states that weren't competitive before, like Arizona and Georgia, come into contention. But at the same time, Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, which were sort of expected by this point to be kind of more solid for Republicans, they haven't really moved to the right as much as people really expected since 2016. They're still very, very competitive as they were 8 years ago. And ever since the Dobbs decision in 2022, you've arguably seen a shift to the left in those states, primarily because they have so many people, so many independent white secular voters who were kind of interested in Trump and shifted towards Trump, and more secular people in the suburbs who were also Republican and have now shifted to Democrats. There's a lot of people in those states who are both pro-choice and more Republican leaning, who have shifted or become less firmly Republican since Dobbs. And it's created a situation where even as other parts of the country have moved to the right, like New York or California or the Deep South, and that's kind of pushed the national popular vote to the right to a certain extent, those states have stuck with Democrats more firmly than the rest of the country. So you saw in 2022, you had Democrats winning by double digits in Pennsylvania and Michigan. But at the same time, they were really struggling in other states like New York. And that polling, that kind of dynamic has carried over since then. It was even the case when Biden was in the race, where he was relatively somewhat competitive in those states, even as he was tanking nationally. And it gave him a very, very, very narrow path to 270 electoral votes. If he won Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and all the safer blue states like Virginia, Minnesota, New Hampshire, he would win the Electoral College 270 to 268, assuming he also got the Nebraska electoral vote, the one Omaha. And that was always his, the narrowest path for him. That was the only real road he had to, getting a majority, at least in my eyes, when he started tanking in the Sun Belt. And since Kamala came in, the big difference has been you've had this kind of across-the-board shift in her favor, which has really solidified her position in the Midwest to the point where you're seeing polls in Michigan, Pennsylvania. And with legitimate pollsters, it's very kind of rare at this point to see a Trump lead in those states. And at the same time, the Sun Belt is back entirely in contention. So her floor is higher and her ceiling is higher, I think, than Trump's is right now. And I think, a lot of the models are showing it close to 50-50, but I think that plus some other fundamentals-based stuff that I'll try to get to a bit later, I think at this point, you'd rather be in her position than Trump's.
Oh, well, certainly. I mean, in the fundamentals of the race, it's quite clear. It's just, you do right that she's kind of raised his floor a bit with this extremely safe approach that seems like a relic from the Biden campaign, or, it's still the exact same people that are running this. She kept on the entire infrastructure. It would have been a very tall task for her, given the situation, the uniqueness of the situation, for her to build a campaign team up from scratch. So it's partly like, it's hard to, it's a chicken or the egg situation, but she's running in a very safe campaign, and it seems in keeping with the Biden strategy from before, which makes no sense to me because she can actually talk.
There's that. There's like the messaging aspects of it where it does seem kind of more geared toward winning over just moderate white voters or Republican leaning. Yeah, like that aspect of it. There's a bit of an argument to be made that kind of might help more. Like you could see, what I've found interesting is that we have seen a shift in the Midwest towards her a little bit since the debate, when she really went all in on kind of just the aesthetic of looking like a strong, capable leader, or kind of shying away from policy. At the same time, she's kind of shored up her position in states like Pennsylvania. Her polling in like states like Arizona and Georgia, to a smaller extent, there was one good poll for her yesterday, but like generally the polling here has been like a bit kind of leaning towards Trump lately. She's done a bit of a better job at solidifying I mean, I don't even want to give her credit for like doing, because the Midwest has been leaning more Democratic for years, since before she came into the race. I think she's just failing. She's doing a decent job at doing a poor campaign strategy. She's doing a good, in my opinion.
Right.
She's doing a good job of projecting. Like if her whole idea is just like kind of just the aesthetics of looking like a strong and capable president and nothing else, and not really committing to anything solid, and not solving the question where people don't know what the hell you will do as president. I guess she's done a good job of playing that, but it hasn't really resolved any people's real kind of concerns with her. I don't because I'm trying to be a bit rosier for her, but it's just so baffling for me. I can't help but go back to it. We've consistently seen that the biggest concern people have with her is that they don't really know how different she is from Biden, or what she stands for, what she believes in, or what she'd do as president. And you have her team talking to CNN just outright saying people only say that they want to do, that people don't actually care about policy. They want us to go on Oprah. It's explicitly trying to do a substanceless campaign, except for the substance allows you to sell out to pro-crypto donors, I guess.
Right.
But
right.
And I think it's making
she's not emphasizing the good stuff from the substance. When is the last? This is overall a positive view of how the campaign is going in terms of the outcome. Yes, I just want to reiterate that. But why there's no talk about what was the stuff from a month ago about price gouging, and even her manufacturing economic pitch. David Dayen had a great write-up about it. The stuff she emphasized and said out loud is all geared towards business leaders, and it's the most conservative elements and tax cuts. But then you read the fine print, and it's a continuation of some of the good stuff from the Biden campaign, from the Biden administration in regards to manufacturing.
Yeah, it's she's trying to say. Usually the justification people give as to why she needs politicians need to do is it's a world of big fundraising. These are billion-dollar campaigns. We have to spend all this money for. But she has a massive fundraising advantage. Most Democrats in the country don't really need to they have so much money from the small donors over the past number of cycles. There has not, we haven't really been seeing this kind of bending over backwards for Mark Cuban or crypto billionaires, because they really don't have to. It speaks to kind of a lack of imagination, where they're just trying to I mean, this was supposed to be kind of a more positive thing, but I think it's kind of an issue that you have, and I think you've also seen it in New York, where if you have a certain political class that is so kind of ossified and only really gets their power through intra-elite wrangling, that's really the only world they know how to understand. All of the people on her team, she's a VP for a guy who beat an establishment opponent 16 years ago, and then took on her entire team for his administration. There hasn't been the kind of shakeup that you see at the state level, where the politicians I would say walls are like a lot more kind of like they practice a politics that actually makes some kind of like discernible sense.
Right. And I would hope that maybe after the campaign is over, that is incorporated into, say, the machine that she has or whatever, because she, you know, this is very different than the infrastructure that, say, Obama came in with the second time around, or what Biden had in 2020. She's a little bit more. She doesn't have the same kind of machine behind her, so it'll be interesting to see how that plays out, and hopefully they move away from this extremely safe, do no harm strategy. But
it's not even really safe, I would say.
Well, how they perceive it, you know what I mean? Yeah. We don't see it in that same way. But can you explain to me why they're not polling better in the Sun Belt? Because my contention always has been Arizona and Nevada both have abortion on the ballot. In Arizona, Galejo is leading Lake consistently with a double-digit lead. Yeah. Why is there that? Why is she losing in polling in Arizona, but Galejo is up by like 10, 12 points?
Yeah, this goes back to like the kind of the failure to separate her from Biden that we were just talking about. Basically, and what I was saying about the fundamentals earlier when I first got on the call, the fundamentals for like the past, basically since Dobbs for Democrats, every single indicator we get from actual voters shows that like there has been a breaking point with the current version of the GOP. Like Dobbs, I think, was kind of a straw that broke the camel's back. We have had all the special elections we've seen like since like basically 2023 show Democrats like with actual voters overperforming benchmarks from 2020, which was an election they already won. We have like the Washington primary, like which is like a sample size of 2 million people voting on basically an early general election. The results there corresponded with like a Democratic lead nationally of 4 points. That's roughly in line with what they won in 2020. You have at the Senate level, we've had these Senate Democrats who have been polling and like who aren't particularly remarkable or even incumbents. Like, I mean, I guess Alyssa Slotkin and like Gallego are fine, but they're not like world beaters or anything. They've been polling incredibly well against their Trump kind of imitator opponents, like for the past 2 years. And you've seen like the big gap between Biden and them was always that like, well, Biden's seen as this failure and he's regarded differently because of his age than these people. Kamala comes in, but instead of matching that kind of baseline level of strength that these Senate Democrats and like other Democrats in special elections and in primaries have been able to manage, she has kind of split halfway, and it leaves the race in a very close position because, and what voters have said repeatedly, is that they don't know precisely how she differs from Biden, like on concrete issues. And I think it is a consequence of this campaign strategy that's not only failing to like address that, but is outright playing into it. Because like it's one thing like when you're just a new figure and people are doubtful about you, they're going to have concerns. But like when like everything she's like a lot of what she's done, I think since really she picked walls, has been like just playing into that. She went out to Axios every single day to disavow some past position from 2019, even when they could have. Like I think Medicare for All was a really perfect place for her to look consistent and break from Biden at the same time. She like reneged on that. She reneged on all of her past positions. Her like that. There was like the line where Trump said that like, oh, her policy page is just run, spot, run because it's just platitudes. And like it's kind of true. She just has like a list of 4 things. It's just YIMBYism and child tax credits. And for a certain kind of voter, I think like a more like well-heeled, like wealthier kind of northern person where your misgivings about Biden are a bit more abstract, like they're able to sort of look past that and be like, well, I'll just see what I want in her. For I think like the lower income minority communities that we have seen Gallego outperforming Kamala with, when you don't see any difference between her and Biden and what you perceive as the policy failures of Biden are hurting you in a very concrete way that like somebody in like Oakland County, Michigan, like might not. Like her not being able to break from him is a lot more serious to you. It's like you consider that as a material issue in a way that like people who just abstractly thought Biden was weak don't.
Right.
So I think that like by trying to be so cute with how she's campaigning, she is actively alienating these people who I think otherwise would really want to like her. People want to like her.
First of all, we're getting corrections. It's Gallego. Apologies, I never took Spanish. I always struggle with that one. But Druber writes in saying, ask Ettinger if he thinks Kamala is trying to help Dems win in Montana, Texas, and Florida. It seems like that's the strategy, just to push back slightly. I mean, the gun thing, I own a gun, I'm going to shoot you in my home or whatever. I mean,
it was corny. It's corny.
I know it's corny, but don't you see what they're doing at least on that front though? Like that you can at least see the strategy if that's what they're trying to do.
I get the idea, but I think that like these kind of discrete ideological positions and even like kind of aesthetic little like totems and tokens that she's laying out, I think that like that just kind of plays into this larger kind of like this. Her issue is that her issue why she was so unpopular for so long wasn't that she was old like Biden. It's because she was seen as like this empty suit who was inexperienced and people didn't really know like where she stood. And she is campaigning to a certain extent like she actually is an empty suit who doesn't believe in anything. It's
at least in recent weeks, I can hear you on that.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean,
at the beginning, there was kind of a more forceful kind of approach, but they've been frozen recently. It's like, and it's a shame because like a lot of this, like she is better at giving speeches and debates than she might have in the past. Like the kind of aesthetic is there, but the content that could make people who really like do have sincere material problems with this administration, like who I think would otherwise really want to vote for her against Trump, she's just like, it's her campaign strategy. It is their explicit philosophy not to provide that. And I mean, it'll probably work out, but like it does not need to be this hard.
Right, exactly. I think that's the point, is that at the end of the day, the picture is still pretty good, but we could be increasing things along the margins. Like, I mean, so North Carolina, Mark Robinson obviously is a huge boost to Democrats there. I think she's going to win North Carolina, but which is interesting because Carrie Lake doesn't seem to be having the same effect for her in Arizona, right? But North Carolina is definitely in play and continuously trending in the Democrats' direction. What's your sense of the race there?
Yeah. I think it's the reason why I can really believe her doing better in North Carolina than here in Georgia or Arizona is the demographic thing. North Carolina is the whitest of all of the Sun Belt states. It's more similar to Michigan and Pennsylvania than it is. It's more similar to Georgia, but like it's more in line with those demographics. I think it's about 10% more white. So that gives her, since her numbers with whites have generally been pretty strong, that gives her a bit more of a floor. The Robinson thing, people like really do disagree with that. People like try to act smart about it and say he won't matter. Like, I mean, I guess like historically the idea of reverse coattails, there's not a ton of evidence for it. But at this point, you're really pushing that concept to its breaking point. Like those types of scandals do drive turnout. Like there will be like kind of a sense of urgency among voters who might otherwise be sort of alienated in this race about like Trump, who's a very known quantity, and Kamala, who's only break-even favorables. In North Carolina, there will be like kind of that will drive people, I think, to vote to the same extent that like an abortion referendum might be able to in a different state. I can really believe that, and I think it really does matter. Because everybody talks like all the time about Pennsylvania, which is 19 electoral votes. If she could lose Pennsylvania, and that she might necessarily not lose the election if she wins North Carolina and Nevada or North Carolina and Georgia, that'll be enough to kind of sub in for that one state. I think North Carolina and Georgia can make it for both Pennsylvania and Wisconsin. I don't have like the math right out in front of me, but like this southeastern part of the country, which I think a lot of people are taking granted, like, or kind of assuming Trump will win, is a very, very real threat for him because that's 32 electoral votes between like us and North Carolina.
And Georgia, I mean, this Fox poll that came out this morning where she's winning, it seems like a bit of an outlier, but we also know that Democrats have been able to have a good ground game in Georgia. So that's also a question here.
I can believe it. Living here. I think one thing with Georgia that a lot of people don't understand, like once we do early voting, you can actually get a good sense of what the results will be here because we don't track voters by party registration, but we do track them by race for some reason. So you can actually get a good sense of what the racial demographics of here, like the state will be, like for a number of weeks heading into Election Day. And if black turnout, I think the rule in Georgia is if black turnout is at 30% and the white Democrats get 30% of the white vote, they win statewide. And I could see Kamala hitting both of those benchmarks. I think that the kind of underappreciated sort of upside for her is she's the first black candidate at a national level since Obama in 2012, and just a small boost in black turnout for that reason could substantially impact the results here.
And New York, you mentioned this earlier. You've adjusted your assessment of how much the Democrats need to win the popular vote by in terms of how that would be reflective in the Electoral College to win the election. I feel like in the past it had been around 3 points, or 2 to 3 points had been the consensus.
It was 2 points. It was roughly 2.5 points in 2016. It was 3.5 points in 2020. People expected it to get worse this year for Democrats. They'd have to win by 4 or 5, which would be a very tall order. That is not easy. But Democrats have kind of shed a lot of votes in New York, California, and also in the rural Deep South, like is kind of another overlooked version of that. Our numbers there have gotten pretty rough in recent years because the people don't really care about abortion at all. But a lot of the polling in New York shows Kamala only leading by like 10 to 14 points, which is enough to win the state. But Biden, I think, at 2021 by like 27. So it's like a significantly reduced margin.
And that's Kathy Hochul having minus 20 favorability per the last Siena New York Times poll.
She's less popular than Trump in New York.
And oh my God! And then the Eric Adams thing is going to also affect Democrats too, right?
Yeah, I don't know how much it'll help, how much it'll hurt, but it certainly can't help them.
Yeah, it certainly can't. So that's, I think, maybe why you adjust a little bit of the national total in terms of assessing the Democrats' chances. Okay, lastly, before we get to your polling guide, the Texas and Florida Senate races. Colin Allred seems to be gaining some momentum in Texas. What is your view of how those races can go? And are the Democrats being smart in putting resources into those races? I saw that I think Bernie Sanders and AOC are going down there to stump for Allred, which is interesting because Bernie Sanders still has pretty high favorables with Latino voters.
The last Democrat.
Yeah.
Bernie's always been very popular with, not always, but since 2020, he's done very well with Latinos. I think there was a study that showed that like a lot of the Latinos who voted for him in 2020 went on to vote for Trump later on that year. You could predict pretty strongly like how much of a shift like in the Rio Grande Valley there would be between like Clinton and Biden shifting to Trump between 2016 and 2020. You could track that pretty closely by how well Bernie did in the primary that year. So I think he has a real appeal in that area. AOC obviously is like a political celebrity and will like always get a lot of people paying attention. Cruz is a very interesting figure, and I think he makes this like a very interesting race because he's a unique incumbent who is so kind of unpopular and noxious that he consistently underperforms his own party. And in Texas, you have another case where even if the demographics aren't the same as in the Midwest, you have such hardline Republican policies at the state level that has kept, I think, the Democratic base very mobilized to an extent that isn't true in California or New York, even though they're both, like all three states are very non-white. So the polling there hasn't been horrifically bad for Kamala. Her numbers look pretty similar to what Biden's are. Allred is outrunning her by two or 3 points, which is enough to put him in the margin of error in some polls. It probably, like the way things are going now, if everything matches the polls exactly, he'll probably lose like relatively narrowly. But if there's a shift in favor of Democrats at the last minute, which like might be possible, or if they're being undercounted in the polls, which like we can only really guess at this point if that might be happening, though there are some theories you could have as to why they might be, he could probably come out ahead. There was one poll that had him leading by a point, which is the first time I think we've seen that, like I think since 2018 with Beto. So like Florida, I don't really like. I just kind of write off. Well, I don't like expect anything from Florida.
Do the cannabis and abortion ballot measures play any role in Florida? I mean, it's a 60% threshold, but yeah.
We've historically seen Florida consistently vote for more left-wing like ballot measures while also voting for Republicans at the state level, like without much of a problem. their threshold for cognitive dissonance is very high.
And the threshold for the complete malfeasance of the Democrats in Florida and their incompetence is probably a better word for it.
Yeah.
Should not be overstated. They're horrible.
Oh God, yeah, they're barely functional.
Yeah.
It does suck the one time they got like a progressive nominee there for like the first time, just like Claude Pepper. He was the most corrupt man alive.
Right, exactly. We'll end this part, and I just want to read how your piece started here about this election isn't a toss-up. With the exception of the VP debate in early October, which if history is any indication won't have any impact on the election at all, there are no set major events to get to between now and November. The tickets have been confirmed, the conventions have been held, the debates have been debated, and Trump's trials and sentencings have been delayed and postponed, absent possible developments overseas, which I will go over later in this article. All we have left to watch going forward are the polls, which are now more important than ever before. Essentially, you later in the piece, you talk about if an all-out war breaks out in the Middle East, that's a potential wild card here. Right now, Israel is bombing Beirut.
Yep, carpet bombing.
So as we speak, this is a possibility. First give us the assessment of the race as it stands if nothing changes, and then all-out war and how that could affect the election.
Yeah, so the big problem, and this is sort of like, this is both, like, so as it stands, I think if you go off of stuff like the Washington primary and the special elections, and you assume that Kamala will mostly be able to, like, kind of perform in line with a generic Democrat, which is not a total guarantee, but, like, probably should happen. I mean, like, she could have made it easier on herself, but she didn't, and we'll see how that goes. She probably will, like, I think she is, is the favorite in the Midwest. Those states all vote pretty closely together. Just those alone will be enough for her to win. North Carolina, Georgia, and I think I would say are like kind of the more fruitful opportunities for her. The Southwest, because Latino voting has been like so bad for Democrats, like in recent years, I'm a little more skeptical of. Nevada, the polling has been pretty decent for her, but I am a little wary about that state. Like I know like what the history is, and Democrats always kind of come back there, and it doesn't look bad now. But like just the demographics just look so kind of like not very promising for them. She has enough like she has like her base in the Midwest is kind of solidified to the extent that Trump's base in the Sun Belt is not, and she only needs her base in the Midwest to win. So I think I would like have her as kind of like, I'd rather be in her position than Trump's right now. I think she's in a more solid place. A war breaking out, on one hand, it won't really do much to change how people regard Biden's foreign policy record and hers as an extension of that. Biden has his foreign policy record, contrary to all of his fucking like whining about AUKUS. It could have convinced you otherwise. His foreign policy record has been one of his worst issues. People think he's been a failure in that regard. Trump has been favored on foreign policy since they started polling this race. It's one of his biggest strengths. There was like a poll, I think, this just goes so contrary to how like the Kamala people have been campaigning. Her second best issue was trans issues. It was tied with abortion as her second best issue. Like this was a Fox poll, and her second worst issue was Israel, Hamas. People consider her and Biden to be completely inept on this. I think she had a perfect opportunity to distance herself from him on that, as much like Hubert Humphrey did in 1968, and that benefited him tremendously at the end of the campaign. But she has not done that. She has hugged very closely to Biden. She gave a full day for him during the DNC. So she will be connected to what he does. That is her own choice. She has made the decision to stick by him. So any increase in salience to what is already, if what some polling averages have shown to be Biden's single worst issue, he has, I think, the Real Clear Politics average had him below 30% on Israel-Palestine approval. That's worse than his numbers on immigration and the economy. Just you cannot get much worse than here. People think he's been a complete disaster. Anything that I don't think his numbers can get any worse than that. The past below 30%, you're getting like Watergate levels where people are just supporting you because like they're Democrats and they're not ever going to say you do anything wrong. All-out war could maybe raise the salience of that in a way that hurts her. But at the same time, you can only go so low on how much like people think you fail with a certain like issue. And I don't know like to what extent Americans even really know what Lebanon is, like to really make a big judgment on it. They'll probably just like kind of in their minds just understand that there's another Biden foreign policy flop and just judge it the same way they've judged it for the past year, which is that he's been a complete disgrace.
Well, you mentioned trans issues in the sense of like that does when issues poll in a particular way, the second question has to be, does that poll translate to how people vote? Like the economy, it's very clear that is what translates into people voting. The thing that an all-out war would do in terms of increasing the salience for people in the country is that would mean that the United States is involved, right, in some ground operation, and that would be a disaster, obviously.
Oh, if U.S. troops are getting directly involved in it, that would be seen as a complete failure far beyond what has even occurred so far. And I think that could very meaningfully hurt Kamala's chances if she doesn't use it as an opportunity to break from Biden.
Okay,
it would really be a do or die moment for her.
Yep, but as you say, the dynamics are so locked in at this point, 5 weeks out, that would be very difficult, I think, to make that pivot because she hasn't done so already. But
no, that's been done in the past.
Right.
Hubert Humphrey called for a bombing halt in October in 1968,
but he lost,
and that worked.
He lost.
But it swung it around for him. Like he gained a lot of points. September 30th, indeed, in fact,
that was the date
that he did the speech.
Yeah, he was down like 20 points.
He gained a lot of momentum after that.
He only lost by 1.
Yeah. No, I agree that it would be the right move, right? It's just, she
should do it, and she's not going to, and that's going to be a failure. So hopefully she can limp over the finish line failing like that.
Yeah. All right, let's turn to your guide to pollsters, because I think this is very helpful for people. You have been quick to point out this dynamic here that I'll read this part of the beginning of your piece. While past elections usually only saw 1 or 2 well-known firms with systemic Republican slants, the Biden era has seen a rise of a huge number of such pollsters who often put out just as much, if not more, data than nonpartisan firms. Can you talk about this new dynamic in polling and these Republican slanted firms kind of cropping up and being included in things like Nate Silver's average, for example?
Yeah, I think this is an instance where the kind of institutional sort of people who follow this, who have been doing this like since like the 2000s or even earlier than that, are not really kind of adjusting as much to new reality. The presumption, like the kind of game theory sort of logic for why Nate Silver would always include everybody and everybody into his models was that like every firm has their primary incentive is to be as correct as possible so they can make more money and get more clients. So we shouldn't assume anything about their motivations other than that they want to like have the most accurate numbers possible. Like that was just like the rule that he had. Anything other than that would just be unfair discrimination. And I think like in 2012, that was probably a fair thing to say. I don't think that's what things look like now in an era of widespread election denial and extreme polarization, where like it's a lot less, there's a lot less of an incentive to like try to be the #1 rated pollster in the New York Times, like polling metric rating system or whatever like they have, or like 538's rating system. That's a lot less of like, that's a lot less lucrative than to just have the best numbers for Trump as much as possible so you can be put on Fox News to talk about why Trump is winning. This was already dynamic for like years. I think like in the late 2000s during the Tea Party, they would have Scott Rasmussen, who would repeatedly go on Fox to say how his polls vindicated like Republican Party talking points. And this has become a whole industry in the era of Trump where you have these entire pollsters whose whole purpose is to fashion results that show results and often like shifts that just fit entirely in line with Republican talking points. People become huge celebrities off of doing this. They like get constant like appearances on like TV and on radio off of having these results that go a certain way. So we're at a point for half of the political world, the incentive is not to have the most accurate results. It's to have the most like pro-Trump results. And in 2022, we saw this happening constantly where it wouldn't just be the very well-known, the people who were well-known for giving pro-Republican results, like gave very extreme numbers for them. They were like, I think Trafalgar had one race in Vermont they said was within single digits, and they were off by 30 points on that. But there were also like a lot of smaller firms that were popping up with similar numbers that were also trying to get like a lot of attention. not only were these like professional outlets, a lot of these were just run by like there was one firm that was just run by two high school teenagers.
Can you sorry to cut you off, Josh, but like you have a group you categorize these in your piece. Again, people should be subscribing to your Substack. This is this section called "The Firms Run by Teenagers and/or Right-Wing Twitter Accounts." Talk about this new dynamic as you were about to get into, but these other right-wing pollsters that are run by literal teenagers.
Yeah, so the first one of this was like a very kind of memorable moment. If you ever follow elections on Twitter, it was the Pennsylvania race with Oz and Fetterman. And there was like Fetterman started off with these really, really big double-digit leads, and then it started kind of falling a little bit as like he wasn't able to campaign, and his polarization kind of kicked in at the end. And people like thought that his odds were plummeting, and there was always a question like, who will be the first pollster to show Dr. Oz ahead? And then like in early October, there was a pollster that showed Dr. Oz ahead. It was called Patriot Polling. It was run by two like actual teenagers in a high school, like I don't know, like a high school somewhere, and it said Dr. Oz was leading. Everybody thought this was like the biggest joke like they've ever seen. But then like the same day, Nate Silver included Patriot Polling in his model. Like this firm with no track record, run by like self-admittedly run by high schoolers, he puts their data in there like at the same like right next to like every other pollster who's like that's run by actual professionals. That's sort of an extreme example, like where it's just obviously kind of like a joke. I thought like there was no explanation for that, and that he was deliberately trying to like shift like the margins in favor of Republicans. But he included them. He included several firms like that are run by adults, but like are controlled by like election deniers, like that just like
SoCal, Qantas News.
Yeah.
Those are the ones that you list there, right?
Yeah, those are new ones. Those are not run by they could be run by adults. They are run by they have started this year, and they are run by right-wing Twitter accounts. SoCal is actually, I thought, was a bit of like kind of a gallant to the goofuses of this sort of thing, because he does try to make himself look legitimate, even though he is like a right-wing like Twitter account guy who's like fake DMs to like in feuds with like liberal Twitter people. Like, but he like, and then Qantas he does the same thing as him. They basically do like the cheapest possible surveys on these like AI like polling survey like software companies, and they don't actually have much control over their own results besides waiting, which can be pretty significant. But like they have been included too. SoCal polling is in the 538 average. Qantas polling is in the 538 average. Qantas polling was like on Twitter literally bragged about moving like an average towards Republicans once, and like 538 just like they sent one guy to call him. They just said, "Oh, sorry, my bad. That's not what I meant." And then it also got revealed that he failed to disclose funding from like far right companies for his polling, like far right organizations. And he also like just said, "Oh, my bad," and they haven't gotten rid of him on the site. The kind of threshold for like just keeping these people like on these very big agenda setting like aggregators that like influence campaign decisions and drive coverage, there is basically no quality control for this. They see it as like impossible to like make any judgments beyond just like what the numbers say when including these people. Like even when they're like they have no experience or no background or no like professional track record on any of this, or like in the case of Trafalgar or Rasmussen, they're run by like people who deny elections. I think Rasmussen polling is like denied the Holocaust. Like it is like there is no floodgates for this sort of stuff, and it's making this should not be a difficult issue to deal with. But like if you're just a lay person following this, like you have no idea what the backgrounds for any of these things are.
You mentioned Rasmussen.
I think it's a terrible mistake.
Yeah, those are the junk, teenager-run ridiculous ones, SoCal, Qantas, and then notoriously Patriot Polling. Those are newer, and that speaks to this dynamic of these right-wing groups seemingly funding these, in some instances, these right-wing leaning pollsters that are getting aggregated and into models like the one that Nate Silver is a part of. We should say that he's now part of Polymarket, which I guess is a crypto Peter Thiel backed thing.
I will say that hasn't changed any of his decision making. He is still making all of the same editorial decisions he's always made for his model. I don't agree with them, but he hasn't shifted his philosophy in favor of them or anything. And his model actually shows very better numbers for Kamala now than it ever has before. I think she's up to 58% on there.
Yeah,
but,
it's just something to note.
I would not be involved in a political betting market. I think that is
as a pollster aggregator. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't bet on politics, and I'm just a guy who writes about them. But I don't want to give off the impression that I'm trying to make money off of what I write. I would never do that. I don't get why people are so lax about that.
Because you could be writing, but Josh, you could be writing things to move the market in another direction, so you could get better odds on betting on the outcome that you actually think is going to happen. That's how this works.
Yeah, I mean, that's obvious to me. It's not obvious to other people. But I will say I do not bet on politics, so I never will. I think that's a very basic thing for me to sacrifice in order to do what I do.
Same here, and I enjoy gambling on sports, but I've never bet on politics.
Yeah.
So Rasmussen, you mentioned, they've been along for a while. You write here, it's denied everything from the 2020 election to vaccine safety to the Holocaust, but they have some respectability and is often cited by Trump. The others that you should look out for
all the time
are the Trafalgar Group, McLaughlin and Associates, Harvard Harris, no association to Kamala Harris. They're the ones that are run by. Is that
Mark Penn.
That's the Zionist one, right?
Yeah, it is a Zionist one that has the push pull stuff that AIPAC cites. Mark Penn is the former Clinton advisor who was a consultant for Trump during his presidency.
By the way, some Clinton to Trump pipeline, if you want to include Alan Dershowitz in there.
Yeah.
That's a whole nother bag. Mm-hmm. Insider Advantage is the other one that leans right. If you could just tell people a little bit more about that one.
Yeah, Insider Advantage, I know them very well because they're another, Trafalgar is also based in Atlanta. Insider Trading, or as I like to call them, is based in Atlanta. Insider Disadvantage is run by a former Republican member of the Georgia State House of Representatives. He's very close friends with Robert Kahale, who is the guy who runs Trafalgar, who is basically there's a good article about this from 2 years ago, but basically the guy kind of just chooses the results of his polls ahead of time. He takes his own samples for each poll, and basically just his results aren't even really results; they're just kind of guesswork. Basically, it's really they're the ultimate disregard. But Towery is really close with Kahale. They run a podcast together, which is kind of cute. I do like that. I'm happy for them. And he goes on Fox News a lot. He's one of these I call them Fox News merchants because they're always on the Ingram or whatever to talk about how their polling numbers are good for Trump. And he also does deny the 2020 election results and says Democrats are doing fraud. So, you can kind of see where his preferences are dialed towards, propping up that narrative as opposed to getting the most accurate results to what the certified results are.
And I'll let you go in a second, Josh. But there are polls that have more succinct and transparent methodologies that are Democratic leaning, Morning Consult leans a little bit Democrat in their results. But what should people?
They're not run by Democratic.
Right, but right, exactly. Yeah. Go on.
They just have certain methodologies that have been decent for Democrats. I will say about Morning Consult, they gave Biden consistently pretty bad numbers when he was in the race. They just happen to be pretty good for Kamala now. I wouldn't really disregard them. Although they aren't really the kind of A standard stuff, they are a tracker poll, and tracker polls aren't really as good for the precise numbers.
And so, who are the polls that you say people should trust the most to look out for and not get? I mean, you can look at the ratings, but for you in this election cycle, which are the pollsters that have been the most accurate and transparent?
Yeah, well, I was really impressed by Marist in 2022. They put out results right before the Senate races that year that were very accurate. They got the Pennsylvania race very closely, the Georgia race very closely, and the Arizona race very closely that year. They had a set of surveys that had very close tied races basically in the Sun Belt, and Kamala leads in the Midwest. which fit very closely with my priors. So I think that they are once again correct. But the New York Times has been a bit weird this year. They've had some like more pro-Trump numbers consistently than other firms. I think even to the point where the guy who runs Rasmussen was like, oh yeah, these guys are oversampling Trump supporters, which I thought was like funny because I've never seen anybody in that world say that before. But they were very like accurate in 2022, so accurate they doubted their own results. But like, I mean, I'd always like, I'm not so certain about them. I think the results are a little bit hard to square with the other stuff we've seen this year, but they're pretty good. Let me think what else. Like state level, like native state pollsters. I know there's a guy, Joshua Smithy in Pennsylvania, and he always like says to keep track of state level pollsters in that state. I mean, I can't think of much else on the top of my head, but
Sure.
like the A+ pollsters on the sites are usually pretty reliable.
Washington Post Ipsos, ABC Ipsos, that kind of deal. Yeah, they've been pretty consistently good. All right, well, I think that gives people a good guide. I wanted, there's a lot of like...
Yeah, like the NBC, ABC, Washington Post, like big name firms are usually pretty good. If Reuters, Ipsos does shit for everybody, they can be kind of weird sometimes, but like they're not like objectively terrible or anything.
It's just good for people to have this information because the poll denialism is something that, I mean, you and I have talked about this, is frustrating, but it's aided and abetted by these Republican junk polls that are shifting the averages.
The institutional aggregators who refuse to provide context.
And that's just not, there's no equivalent on the left or on the Democratic side. There really isn't.
There should, if somebody wants to make a lot of money, they probably could do this. Like people always say, oh, why don't Democrats do this? Why don't they have their fake pollsters? This shows a lack of confidence. That it only shows people who are not on the ball in terms of like being able to make a lot of money. If you like created a polling firm called like Lepanto Strategies or like Blue Wave Polling or whatever, and you put out shit showing Kamala up in Florida, you would be on MSNBC News within a week. Like you would like get so much attention.
You would, but you know, I mean, I like Democrats taking it to the Republicans on that front, but I don't even know what the value is. It just feels like Republican pollsters are doing this
for those people who get money. No, the
for them to. I don't care about them getting money, Josh.
People. Yeah, yeah. Well, it doesn't provide value to like the world. Okay. But like this is just my advice to somebody who wants to grift.
Yes, thank you for that. I really appreciate that advice. Thanks so much.
Subscribe to Ettingermentum for a kickback.
Yeah, exactly. Ettingermentum.news. You are one of my favorite writers, particularly on electoral politics. So appreciate all of that and support Ettingermentum over at his Substack. Thanks for calling in, and hope you're safe down in Georgia, even though I know it's some stormy weather.
Good. Miranda says hi.
Hi, Miranda. Good to, viewers may remember, called in to talk about the polio epidemic in Gaza with her set of expertise. So really appreciate that. Thanks so much, Josh. Have a good rest of your day, all right?
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for having me on, as always.
For sure. All right. Well, with that, we're going to wrap up the first hour of this program. We're going to head into the fun half where we'll take your calls. We'll read your IMs. The number is 646-257-3920. Matt, what's happening on Left Reckoning?
Left Reckoning, we had a good discussion yesterday with Anna Kornblue and Russ Biglia on Frederick Jameson, a Marxist literary theorist who recently passed away, I mean, a couple days ago. I actually came to Marxism through literature studies, and Jameson was a huge part of that with his Political Unconscious, and that was the essay that I read in undergrad before I was even considering myself a Marxist. I was just a nice Obama supporter. But he goes into, just looking at literature as like, hey, maybe let's talk about the romantic elements of, say, Jane Austen or something like that. Look into how this is about dowries and exploiting the colonies for money that you can put towards a marriage and make yourself a suitor. But a very interesting discussion with Anna and Russ on that and postmodernism, one of Frederick Jameson's major books. So check that out, patreon.com/leftreckoning. It's going to be up on Sunday.
And on ESPN, Bradley and I gave our picks for the weekend. I picked Thursday Night Football, first push of the week, or for the year, I should say. We had some fun analyzing the games this weekend, youtube.com/ESPN show. All right, gonna open up the phone lines once we get back from the fun half. See you there.
Okay, Emma, please.
Well, I feel that my voice is sorely lacking on the majority report.
Wait, whoa. Look, Sam is unpopular.
I do deserve a vacation at Disney World. So, ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure to welcome Emma to the show.
It is Thursday.
Yeah, I think you need to take over for Sam.
Yes, please.
No. I'm gonna pause you right there.
Wait, what?
You can't encourage Emma to live like this. And I'll tell you why. So was offered a tour, sushi, and poker with the boys. Tour, sushi, and poker with the boys. Was offered a tour, sushi, and poker with the boys.
What?
Tour, sushi, and poker.
Tim's upset?
Tour, sushi, and poker with the boys. Was offered a tour, sushi, and
that's what we call it in the biz.
Tour, sushi, and poker with the boys.
Right.
Tour, sushi, and poker.
We're gonna get demonetized.
I just think that what you did to Tim Pool was mean.
Free speech.
That's not what we're about here. Well, look at how sad he's become now. You shouldn't even talk about it because I think you're responsible.
I probably am in a certain way, but let's get to the meltdown here.
Tour, sushi, and poker with the boys.
Oh my God.
Tour,
Wow.
sushi.
I'm sorry, I'm losing my fucking mind.
So was offered a tour, sushi, and poker with the boys.
Logic.
Tour, sushi, and poker with the boys. Boy. Tour.
I think I'm like a little kid. I think I'm like a little kid. I think I'm like a kid.
Tour.
I think I'm like a little kid. I think I'm like a little kid.
Had this debate 7,000 times.
A little kid. I think I'm like a little kid. I think I'm like a kid.
Tour. I'm losing my fucking mind.
Some people just don't understand.
So I'm not trying to be a dick right now, but like I absolutely think the U.S. should be providing me with a wife and kids.
That's not what we're talking about here. Okay, all right.
It's not a fun job.
Tour? That's a real thing. That's real thing. Real thing. Boss. Willy Wonka tour? That's a real thing. That's real thing. Real thing. What's that offered a tour? That's a real thing. That's real thing. Real thing. Boss. That's a tour? A real thing. That's real thing. Real thing. Boss. That offered a tour?
Ladies and gentlemen, Joe Rogan has done it again.
That offered a tour? That's a real thing. That's poker with the boys.
I think he might be blowing it out of proportion.
Real thing. That's poker with the boys. That offered a tour? That's a real thing. That's poker. Let's go, Joey. Tour? Sushi and poker with the boys.
Take it easy, bro.
Tour, sushi, and poker.
Things have really gotten out of hand.
Sushi and poker with the boys.
Delusional?
Tour,
Deluded.
sushi.
You don't have a clue as to what's going on. Live YouTube.
Sam has like the weight of the world on his